school, then we go to college, we specialize in the subject of our choice. This has not happened by chance, and it has actually come from this ancient Indian civilization. So that's how I got the more I learned about it, the more I had, and eventually I ended up writing a book. So one of the interesting things about the ancient Indian education system was that learning was a sacred, important duty. So the whole concept of knowledge, learning is sacred. So it's your duty, it's your dharma to educate yourself, to know, to get knowledge in some subject, to become specialized in a subject. That is considered sacred. And I have shown you this picture of a ceremony which is performed in childhood. When a child learns the alphabets for the first time, that's also a sacred ceremony. It's called Vidyarambha in South India. And in Bengal, they have different names like Hatikori. So in South India, what they do is they trace the alphabets on rice. The parents make the child do it. So the first day a child learns the alphabet is a very special sacred day. And it's not just for boys, girls also, boys and girls. And this ceremony is important. So the whole approach was like that. So that's the reason you might have seen that if a book falls on the floor, they pick up the book and they do like this. And like they're saying sorry to the book for having dropped it or given disrespect to it, and they put it back respectfully. So this is the culture of India. Now, you might be interested to know that there was a time when people rushed to India for higher education. So in a manner that today people come to Ivy League universities in America, or they go to Oxford. Well, India was like that. If you go back to say earlier than 11th century, 10th century, all the way back to BC, because Takshashila, the oldest university which has been excavated, goes to 6th century BCE. So in all the ancient periods, throughout, we find mention of universities in India even as far back as 3rd century, 2nd century BC, even 5th century BC. So students came from China, Japan, Korea, Indonesia, Malaysia, Western Asia, basically whichever part of the world was civilized at the time, wanted to send its best students to India for higher education. And mind you, it was not easy in those days. It was not like today when you can just take a plane and reach or go where you want to go. Those were very dangerous journeys, and many times the people who came to travel would lose their lives, and those who survived have documented that. For example, these Chinese travelers or students who came to India, Huang Yan, Zhuangzhang, Yiji, these are just 3 names, there are many. They all talk about how they took so much of risk in order to reach India, and then when they went back, when they took back manuscripts which they wanted to translate, and how they guarded it with their lives because they didn't want to lose it, in a shipwreck or anything. There were special prayers for that they would pray, please protect all that we are carrying, our books, our manuscripts, please protect our knowledge. So, all they just journeys, and then even after all those journeys, when they reached some top university in India, there was no guarantee that they would get admission because there were stringent admission tests. Nalanda, for example, I'll tell you more later, had very, very stringent tests. Only 20% students would get through. So it was that way. And so the students, foreign students, found it the hardest, and they would politely turn back after being kept in a rest house for 2 days, and then they would be asked to leave because they didn't make it. So it was like that. All the top universities of India had stringent admission tests. Now I go back to the oldest universities, which probably won't be visualized as universities today, but if you look at what they did, they were universities. Forest universities, in the midst of nature, and they were, if you see in Mahabharata, there's a mention of ashramas there are many ashramas headed by rishis like Vyasa, Shaunaka, Kandva, Vasishta, Vishwamitra, so many sages. And then if you look at Kandva's ashrama, it's like a university because he was the head of many ashramas, and so each ashrama was specializing in a different subject. So you had all the subjects of the time. You had Vedas, Yajna-related literature, logic, grammar, mathematics, zoology, physical sciences, medicine. All these subjects were taught in different ashramas, and a student would have to first go to one guru, learn one subject, then he would go to another guru, learn another subject, and that is the way you would complete what you would call today a degree course maybe. It would take 5 to 8 years to complete it. And so it was a very holistic learning. Yeah, go forward. Yeah, so here is a pictorial representation done by an artist for my book, which shows what those forest universities might have been like. The number of students weren't large because they would be selected very carefully, and so the ratio was very good, the teacher-student ratio. Now here is a page, it's okay if you're not able to read it, but this is from a book from a page from Nyaya Shastra, which was a book on logic. I'm so trying to tell you how important logic was for the Indian education system. In fact, for all the philosophies, they all have a logic, it's all laid out carefully. Nyaya especially is very famous for logic. This one is all talking about going from whole to the part and part to the whole, about false reasoning, good reasoning and bad reasoning. So Indians were obsessed with this, with good reasoning. They were very invested in knowing, in distinguishing between the material and the moral, between the physical and the spiritual, right? Between the permanent and the temporary. So they were always trying to make analogies, trying to analyze something and to know what is right, what is wrong. And it's possible that in the course of doing all those things, they found all the rules of geometry, grammar, all that has come from the logical, the churning that was going on in India. Right? So, when they did their homas, what you call homa, yagya, you all know what yagya is. So they had to make perfect squares for that. So by doing that, they probably found the rules of geometry by trying to make perfect squares, circles, and they also had a lot of complicated yantras which they would draw in order to start the prayer, and those were all geometrical shapes, and they would make perfect right angles. So it's possible that during so there was no artificial divide between religion and science. Religion often led to science, right? So, for example, they would try to find the correct time, the most auspicious time to do a puja or a homa, and that's how they probably found the laws of planetary motion, celestial bodies, the movements of celestial bodies. So they would know all about when the sun will come here, when the moon will go there. So they didn't make any artificial divide between religion and science. And so many of the religious people were very good mathematicians, scientists. In fact, always. It was always that. And look at some of the sentences I've taken out some quotes from Nyaya Shastras, and you will find that they're so relevant even today. Truth exists whether or not we humans acknowledge it. Just look at that. Then, Sushruta Samhita is the oldest medical treatise found today. And what does that say? It says, it's actually introducing you to interdisciplinary learning. So it says, a physician who has learned one science only cannot be sure of his own science. And for this reason, the physician has to be versed in many sciences. So what we are talking about today, about you should have interdisciplinary approach to subjects, was something that was very common in India. They all knew it. Like if you just know your one science, you're not going to be a very good scholar. You have to go and speak to other scholars. You have to know what they're studying, and you have to collaborate with them. Now I've tried to map out the universities in ancient India, but it's not a complete list, complete picture, because there are many which are still being excavated. And many of them are close to the ones which are already there. So you can see that almost every part of India is plastered with universities. You throw a stone and you get a university. So Takshashila in the northwest, that is the oldest which has been excavated, 6th or 5th century BC. Then you can see Sharda Peeth in Kashmir, that was very famous. Kurushapura. Then in the eastern side you can see a cluster of universities. Nalanda, Udalapura, Nadia, Vikrampur. Most of these were destroyed during the Muslim invasions. And then when you go to the south, you can see so many of them. These are Vidyapura, Kanchipura, Vennayiram, and then even in Sri Lanka you can see Anuradhapura. And of course I've not shown you what universities existed in Indonesia, but there were many of them. And the interesting thing is that students travel to the universities of their choice. So even though it was all spread out, it was not that students stayed in the state in which they were born. They traveled. And so teachers travel, gurus travel, right? So you will find that in the famous university Nalanda in the east, some of the two of the professors there had come from Vallavi in the west. They had set up Vallavi University in the west. Dinnaga and Dharampala, if I remember their names right. They set up Vallavi and then they moved to Nalanda and became professors there. And again in Nalanda there were many professors who came from the south, from Kanchipuram. And then there were some professors from Vikramshila, which is also in the east. They moved to Tibet. They went and taught in Tibet. So there was a lot of moving around. People moved around, they shared their knowledge, and once a student was certified by the teacher as being as having completed his degree, then he would again start traveling. He would start moving because his job was to share knowledge. It was the sacred duty of everyone who got educated to spread the knowledge to others. Now this is a picture of Bhaskaracharya. He's one of the most famous mathematicians that nobody has heard of. We all know of Newton, right? We know so many others, but we don't know Bhaskaracharya. But he can be called the father of differential equations. So he did so much of work in mathematics and astronomy, and he was from a university called Ujjain, which is in central India. And that university was very famous for astronomy, and again, very difficult to get into. So when students passed out of Ujjain, then they would be given a lot of respect because they have come from Ujjain, which is the center of astronomy and mathematics, right? And it's not just him. If there is a lineage, his guru, all of them were well known figures in mathematics and astronomy. Brahmagupta, for example, the person who made zero, who made zero very popular, and he talked about what happens when you add zero to a number, what happens when you subtract zero from a number, when you multiply zero to a number. All those things were explained by Brahmagupta, who was from the same university. Okay, so please do Google Bhaskaracharya, read about him. He can be called one of the most brilliant scientists ever. And long before Newton and the others talked about differential calculus, he was talking about it, right? And another interesting thing is that he wrote a book for his daughter called Leelavati, which was all mathematical problems for his daughter. Now what does that tell you? That women were educated too. So in each of those shlokas, now the interesting thing is these are not just dry books with just formulae, right? They're all very poetic, they're all set in poetry. So the people in those times, the mathematicians had to be good in languages too. They had to know how to compose a very elegant verse which is easy to memorize and also conveys a theorem or a law or a formula. Okay? And so that book Leelavati is entirely dedicated to his daughter, because every shloka is ending with, "You, my beautiful girl, come on, can you answer this question?" You know, it ends like that. So you should try and read it, maybe the translation of Leelavati.
Which century was Bhaskaracharya born?
Huh?
Which century?
This was around 11th or 12th century. 11th or 12th. Yeah. Now these are the ruins of Nalanda University. Today you probably can't make out how grand it was, but you have seen the great universities in America and England. But try to think of something like that in India. Nalanda was so beautiful that most of the people who studied there, the Chinese students, they were given glowing descriptions of it. How there was a huge gate to enter and there was a wall all around, but the moment you entered, they said it was full of gardens, full of ponds with lotuses blooming in them, and then the upper floor stories were covered with mist. And then Yuan Sang says that if you go to the top floor, then you will see splendid sunsets and moonlit nights from there. And then he talks about how the external grandeur was matching the internal delicacy of carvings inside the campus, right? There was a huge statue of Buddha outside. And then when you went in, the whole university had carvings and sculptures, which are of course all broken when it was invaded by Bakhtiar Khilji, when the Muslim invasions happened, but some of them have been retrieved and kept in a museum. So if you go to Nalanda, please do visit the museum adjoining it and you'll see some beautiful sculptures. And as I told you, it was very difficult to get admission here. Only 20% students got admitted and the rest were rejected. And that is why all around Nalanda, the villages, there were coaching centers where children could go and get coached to get through the difficult exam, the entrance exam of Nalanda. So similar to the coaching centers that you see today in India, that existed even then. And the ratio was such that there were 8,500 students and about 1,500 professors, teachers, right? And there were 100 lectures a day. That's what we find. That's what Yuan Sang and Fahia and Yi all the Chinese travelers have talked about it. And these lectures were not, students didn't like to miss them. They would be there, they would be seated right in the morning waiting for the professors. Nobody bunked these lectures. And the other thing is it was a very well-funded university. About 100 villages around Nalanda used to, their revenues were totally for this university. So the students who came to study, Their food, their clothes, their medicines, their all other expenses were taken care of. So it was all full scholarship. Now we come to the debating traditions of India, which was very, very intrinsic to our philosophy, our tradition. And I have chosen this picture of the famous debate between Adi Shankara and Mandana Mishra. And look at who is adjudicating, who is the judge. It's a lady. And she was a scholar, very famous scholar in her own right. And so she is judging this debate. So debating was, and probably you see the remnants of that debating tradition even today. You know, we have all those TV channels in India and they're constantly debating about something or the other. And come what may, democracy is there for it to stay in India. It never goes away. The military never manages to take over, like in Pakistan or the other German countries, or China, the autocratic society which has doesn't allow debate between the state and the participants. But here it was not like that. The king himself would often call for debates and he would ask the best scholars to congregate, and then they would be awarded. They would be rewarded. The best debaters would be rewarded. And there were rules for debate. So in the next slide, I have given you some terms of debate which were used, like Sadhya, which was the thesis to be established, Siddhanta, which was the proposition, tenet, or conclusion, Hetu, reason, Udaharana, example. So there were terms, lots of terms for debate. Anumana was inference, Pratyaksha, perception, that was very important, what you see. Pramana, proof. Pramana, what is your pramana? That was a question which is often asked to a student. So you are asserting this, what is your pramana? And then you would have to go through the steps. So Vasu Bandhu was a famous scholar. He laid out 22 criteria for marking debates. So how do you, for judges to deduct points during a debate. So here I'll just give you 10 points. If you read my book, you'll get the others. Like hurting the proposition, you would lose marks. Right? Pratiknyahani, shifting the proposition. Pratignantara, opposing the proposition. Pratignya virodha. Renouncing the proposition. Pratignya sannyasa. Shifting the reason. Hetavantara. Shifting the meaning of the topic. Arthantara. So they have covered practically everything. And you had to be polite while debating. So if you resorted to abuses or insults, then you would be, again, your points would be deducted. And it was also important to do what we call Purva Paksha. So, you could not debate with somebody unless you were completely well versed with his point of view or her point of view. So, you could not just say, come on, I'm going to talk to you about debate, and you just make your own points. Then you will be kicked out of the debate by whoever was the judge. So, you had to be completely thorough. You had to know how to argue from his point of view, as if you were him. And then only you could challenge him or her. And then there has to be an audience, there has to be a king, or there has to be a senior person who is going to judge the debate. That's the way debates were held. So the other interesting thing is that Zhuangzi, the Chinese student who spent a lot of time studying in India, he was very impressed that India, the people of India, did not have to be forced to learn. It came very naturally. So the seeds of curiosity were planted in childhood itself. And then he was very impressed with the ascetic lifestyle of teachers. You know, they were ascetics. They were devoted to learning and teaching, and they had very high moral standards. And even though the state gave them awards, rewards, they didn't care much for it. They would just, they would often be shabbily impressed maybe, but their main intention was to travel and teach, right? And so the students would give them whatever they wanted to give them. But these gurus, these teachers, didn't even care for domestic bliss, he says. They didn't even, sometimes they neglected their families because they were so into teaching and sharing their knowledge and building up the knowledge through students, getting them to do research and so on. They knew no fatigue and traveled across the country to teach and share knowledge. Now this slide tells you a little about the funding of higher education. So the ethos of the times demanded that Brahmin scholars led simple lives and engaged in pursuit of knowledge without amassing riches. So it was looked down upon if a Brahmin who is a teacher is rich, if he is having a big house, and then slowly he would lose credibility and students would move away from him or her. So it fell upon the shoulders of wealthy non-Brahmin families and farmers to support those who devoted their entire lives to learning and teaching. And there was a lot of respect for students and scholars and professors. So if they had to dress in a certain way so that people would know that they are students or teachers. And if they were hungry, all they had to do was knock at somebody's door and say, Bhikshavdehi, and then they would get food. They would get food. Nobody would refuse a scholar or a student food or water or fruits or anything he asked for. Because it was when you gave to a scholar, you are helping knowledge to grow, so it was considered good karma on your side. So most people did that. Now, expenses were subsidized by the ruling kings. I told you about Nalanda, 100 villages funded it. Students and teachers received clothes, food, bedding. And in some ashramas, the rich students paid, while the poor students did work. So in lieu of payment, the guru would ask them to do some work so that they didn't have to pay. Maybe they would get water from the well, they would clean the courtyard and things like that. Right? That was also there. So usually the Brahmins were too poor to pay. So they had to do menial tasks, whereas the Kshatriyas and the other Varna students didn't have to do that. So I think I finished with this. Now, I spoke to you about forest universities, I spoke to you about Nalanda, Vikramshila, those were brick and mortar universities. But temples were universities too. Temples were not just places where people went to worship a deity. So typically they would start like that, but eventually when scholars, when debates would start taking place, so they would build an annexing and then there would be a debate hall, and then there would be more additions and there would be a lecture hall. So temples became universities too. And as you know, there was no bar on debating on any topic. So everything, it was not like this is only religious topics were talked about. Anything could be discussed. So this is a temple in Tamil Nadu, it still stands, we are grateful for that. And this was also a university. Now here is Ennayuram, which is a place in Tamil Nadu, where they discovered inscriptions which tell you how institutionalized education was. It talks about how much allowance should be given to gurus, to teachers, how much allowance should be given to students, and a guru gets 16 times more allowance than a student. And then students who are studying the easier subjects get lower allowance than students who are studying Mimamsa, Vedanta, they were getting more allowance. So all this is written there. And just a few years back, they discovered more rows of writing when they dug below. So there is still a lot to excavate. Now these are the ruins of Sharda Peeth in Kashmir. Kashmir was not known as Kashmir, it was known as Sharda Desh. And it was known for this university called Sharda Peeth. Again, there was a temple and there was a huge university with books, with plenty of books where people would come to refer. In fact, there are references to Ramanujacharya from southern India coming all the way to Sharda Peeth because he wanted to write his commentary, the Mahabhashya, on the Brahma Sutras. But before starting on that, he wanted to refer to some books which were only available in Sharda Peeth. Now, why it is in ruins is because Sikandar was a king in the 15th century in Kashmir, wanted to convert all the people to Muslims. That was the time when they were converted to Islam. I mean, they killed half of them and the remaining ones converted on fear. And this university was raised to the ground. This was the time. Now we come to the knowledge transfers from India to China. Okay, so because India had so much of knowledge, so many gurus, so many professors, and the whole institutions, it was so institutionalized, it was but natural that people carried manuscripts and they took professors from here to outside India. So thousands of Sanskrit manuscripts were carried to China, and these are some of the Indian scholars like Kashyapa Matanga, Dharmaratna, Samudra, Dharma Satya, all these, just a few names that I put. These are Indian scholars who went to China and helped in translating Sanskrit works into Chinese, right? And throughout the 1st century, 2nd century, hundreds of scholars went from India to China. I think it became quite profitable for them because they were enticed with with good offers. So that's how many of them went. Now Dharmaruchi, for example, he traveled from southern India to China. Not many people know this. And he lived in China for 20 years, from 693 to 713, and he translated 53 works into Chinese. Now the interesting thing is, if you read what these people have written, they are all competing in how many works they have translated. Many of them, like even the Chinese scholars who came to India, went back, they went with manuscripts, and they say, oh, I have got 693 books, manuscripts. Another guy says, I got 500, I got 400. So it was a very sacred work to go to India, bring the works, Sanskrit works back, and then translate them. That was sacred work for the Chinese scholars. And there are some interesting stories like Dharmakshema was an Indian scholar who went there. He was being wooed by two kings, and then in the process the poor guy got shot by an assassin. I mean shot in the sense not with gunpowder but arrows. So he was killed because both the king said that one king said if I don't get him, the other guy is not going to get him too. And he was killed for no reason. And then Amogavajra was another Indian scholar. He took 500 texts from different parts of India and went and he was rewarded. Many of these scholars would be given palaces to live in China. And of course, you would not know that they are Indian because their names would be changed. They would be given Chinese names. And so many of these people who did great things, many of the great scholars in the ancient period in China were actually Indians with different names, Chinese names. So, Indian astronomers and mathematicians from the best universities held high positions in China's scientific establishments. So, for example, Indian scientist Gautama Siddha, now the name they gave him was Kutan Siddha in Chinese, and he became president of China's official board of astronomy in the 8th century. He translated the Navagraha calendar into Chinese and he introduced Indian numerals to China. So, the calendar system and numerals were given to China by India. Then even the invention of the printing press is attributed to Buddhist scholars who went from India to China, and printing was used to spread Buddhist thought all over China. If you want references for all this, please get my book. It's available on Amazon, and I have given you the references. This is the statue of Kumarajiva, who is, again, he was born in India and he moved to China. He was given a lot of respect. He was a genius. He was extremely gifted. He translated more than 100 Sanskrit works, and he translated works which had been translated before but were not good enough, and his translations became bestsellers in China. That's why they have a statue for him there in Xinjiang. He's very well respected, Kumarajiva. Now I come to knowledge transfer from India to Greece, to the Islamic world and to Europe. So, people know about the thriving trade between India and Western Asia, which was the spices and textiles. But there was also a lot of buying and selling of medicines. So the medical knowledge was probably the first to go from India, because Indians had developed, medical sciences was so advanced in India. They had surgery, they had remedies for different illnesses, and it was all very well documented. Right? It was also committed to memory, and then it was written by the Sushruta, who wrote the whole book, then Satcharaka. There were many others, right? Now, Dr. Raj Vedam has laid out the trajectory by which Ayurveda was transmitted out of India and formed the basis of medical knowledge in Europe. Rishi Kanada is a very important person here in transmission because his works were taken up by Democritus. You can call it plagiarization because he doesn't really give credit to him. And then he's called the father of modern science, Democritus. But you will see that many of the things, what he says are very similar to what Kanada said in the 6th century, and Democritus came much later, and 4th century, we see, and then Hippocrates was his student, and he's considered the father of Western medicine. So Hippocrates got it from Democritus, who got it from Kanada, and so there was this channel by which Ayurveda, physics, chemistry, a lot of knowledge was transferred to the Greeks from India. And then there is also the Library of Alexandria, which was very famous. They believed in buying or borrowing or stealing the best books from wherever they were available. And so the ships that used to stop at Alexandria had to give up all their books. And those days, a lot of ships used to come from India. And so it's quite possible that a lot of works from India found their way to Alexandria, the Library of Alexandria. And this is how the Greeks got so many manuscripts which they were able to completely translate and use it in their writing. So you will see a lot of similarities in Greek science and Indian science, for example. Now, coming to the Islamic connection, there was an Indian physician, Manka, in the court of the 5th Abbasid Caliph, and he translated Sushruta Samhita into Persian. In fact, Baghdad had many Indian scholars. There was a settlement of Indians in Western Asia, all scholars. They were in much demand, right? So Indian scholars were invited to Baghdad. The works of Muslim intellectuals such as Al-Kindi, Al-Farabi, Al-Fardani, Al-Tabari, and Al-Khwarizmi played an important role in transferring Indic knowledge of mathematics, medicine, astronomy, philosophy, chemistry and even music to the Islamic world. And many times the Islamic scholars gave credit to Indian scholars. So it's very interesting. So the Islamic scholars actually say it is coming from Hindustan, it's coming from Hind, and so they laid out. But then when this was taken up by the European Renaissance was proven by the works of Arabic scholars, which were passed off as original works by Europeans. There are books on this, and you can see the sources that I have cited. A lot of works of the Islamic scholars were taken up by the Europeans during the Renaissance and then passed off as original works. They were not original. They had come from Islamic science, which in turn had come from Indian science. Complete translations. There was a Toledo school of translators in Spain in the 12th and 13th century, and their work was simply to translate Islamic works into Latin. So all the Islamic works of science, they just day and night they translated and translated. And because in those days there was also a fear, because when the Muslims were being attacked by the Christian world, when the Christians took over, that was when they wanted to hide their sources, and so everything was translated quickly and projected as a Christian work. This is a statue of Garcia the Otter in Lisbon. Now he is a person who spent a lot of time in India. Okay, he studied in Goa, he also spent time in Tamil Nadu. He collected information about Ayurvedic medicines and he wrote this bestseller. This book was a reference book in Portugal for medicine for a long, long time. Okay, and it can be, the title is translated to Conversations on the Simple Drugs and Medicinal Substances of India. And his works influenced later works in medicine all over Europe. Now I come to how all this was destroyed, right? How the process started. There was a deathly blow to learning when there was an invasion, like when the Muslims took over India, right? Starting from the 10th century, 11th century. There was mindless violence, and these universities were just destroyed for no reason. And the books, in Nalanda, the library burned for months because there were so many books. There was a 4-story library in Nalanda. And it took so long to burn the books. They just burned them. So you can imagine today something like this. Can you imagine invaders coming to a university like this and destroying, killing all the professors, killing all the students, destroying all the books? That's what happened to all the universities in northern India. Northern India universities were all destroyed that way, right? Kashmir, or to take eastern India, Vallabi in the west also was destroyed the same way. Nothing was left. Those who could escape, a few of them went to Tibet, and that's how we are able to reconstruct what was taught in Nalanda through the Nalanda and Vikramshila, through the professors who managed to escape to Tibet, carried some manuscripts with them, right? So it was a very disturbing period in India, and I think we've still not got over it, even after so many centuries. All these universities were destroyed. And then the interesting thing is that earlier destruction of libraries in Cordoba, Alexandria, Persia, and Ghazni were not taken into account probably by these universities in India. They were happily doing their teaching, and they were not aware that something like this can happen. They were totally taken by surprise. So if you read the biography of Mahmud Ghazni, right, you will see how the biographer talks about how many scholars were killed and they were all lying on the ground and all that stuff. And he's saying, we don't even know what's in these books because there's nobody to tell us what's in these books because we have killed everyone. That kind of thing. Now, so the temples were also destroyed. Qutbuddin Aibak destroyed temples in Banaras. Banaras was a very important, Varanasi was an important center of education, and many of those scholars escaped to southern India. You will see a lot of movements in India after the Muslims invaded, and that's how you will see that some knowledge was preserved in the extreme fringes of the Islamic Empire, where they were able to freely teach and debate and all that. But within the Islamic Empire, anything that came from Sanskrit was under scrutiny, was destroyed. Okay, and there was an emphasis on Islamic education. So now madrasas, maktabs, and all came over, and then Arabian and Persian were imposed. There was some respite during Akbar's rule because Akbar was a benevolent king. He wanted to reverse some of the things done by the earlier Islamic rulers. So during his time, there was peace, and in fact, some Hindu students were actually invited to join madrasas. But again, all this was gone when Aurangzeb came, and Aurangzeb again reversed everything. Again, it was Islamic rule, there was only Islamic learning, so that was again a very bad time for knowledge. There was an absence of science education. It's noticed that during the Mughal period, they were interested in poetry, literature, but somehow science was not encouraged as much as during the earlier period when the earlier dynasties before the Muslim rule were very fond of science. You have so many Hindu kings who promoted science, astronomy, but it took a beating during the Muslim rule. So, the Mughals did not build on the leading and scientific concepts that were presented by Hindu scholars of earlier era to become world leaders in science and math, despite ruling over the richest country. This was a time when India had the highest GDP in the world. It was very, very rich, right? Because Indians were trading, they were producing almost everything that was consumed by the rest of the world. The factories were all in India. So they were rich. But then they didn't build up on the science of the earlier era because of this dark period which enveloped India. Sanskrit works of scientists and mathematicians began to be forgotten. The madrasas proliferated and students became adept in the finer details of Quran and Hadith in Muslim India, but the Western world was making advances in science and technology. With what they had taken from India and then they built on it, it was making advances, whereas India lost out. Then we come to the period of British imperialism. So there were many European powers which were trying to reach India. So you know all about how the Portuguese came first and then the Dutch and all the others. And then finally the English people managed to beat all of them and they took complete control of India. And then how did that affect the Indian education system? We look at that now. In the early British years, they did not bother with education of the natives, right? So they just were focusing on playing politics with different rulers. You know, they would make the kings fight. They would side with one king, make him fight with the other guy. Then they would, take a cut from all the whatever was looted. So that's what they were not interested in education. But as they found that they are now almost controlling the whole of India, because so many of the kings were paying tribute to them, then they realized that they need to do something about education because in India, everybody was literate, and education was given a lot of importance. So there was no way they were going to rule India without finding their way into the education system of India. Mind you, it's not like they wanted to educate Indians, because in America, the slaves, the black slaves were told that they cannot congregate for the purpose of education or anything like that, right? So it's not like they wanted to educate Indians. But they realized that if they have to administer India, they need Indians, they need the help of Indians to administer India, right? Because they had come to stay. And they also wanted to change their minds. They wanted to make them not hate them as foreigners, but to respect them, admire them. So they knew they had to change the education system, right? Then two groups formed, the Anglicists and the Orientalists. So the Anglicists wanted to educate the Indians in English, and the Orientalists said, let's take English books of science and maths, translate them into the local languages and educate them in that language, and then use that route to influence them and get them to respect us and accept us as rulers, right? But the thing about both Anglicists and Orientalists is that they both had the same belief about the innate inferiority of the Indian culture and the need to educate elites. That is there. If you read all that they've written, they knew that they believed that these are all inferior people and we have to give our knowledge to them and we'll find a way how to do it. Now, why did the British impose English on India? There was a convenience attached to having English-speaking natives, right? Because they didn't want to learn so many languages in India. So it's good to get them to learn English and then get them to do the work for us. So that's how they thought about it. So the large number of British officers could not understand regional languages. Then sepoys, that means the soldiers, they realized they could become disloyal if they were educated in Persian or Sanskrit, right? Because then in the Sanskrit, people who studied Sanskrit would know what a glorious history they had, what literature they had, and they would then regard these as usurpers, as lechas, as they would call them. And similarly, those who study Persian would realize that these are, unclean people and they are outsiders, they are non-Muslims, so we should not be doing anything for them. So they said we should not be educating, we will not get anybody in the army. See, they wanted to build big armies in India, right? So how would they get them if they educated them in their own indigenous education system, right? So familiarly acquainted with English literature, the Indian would speak of great Englishmen with the same enthusiasm as the British themselves. This is from what they wrote themselves. The British, Charles Trevelyan, has written this to his brother-in-law, and they were all very much part of India's education system. They formulated the laws. So they said that once they were educated in English, they would reject the teachings of Brahmin priests The natives shall not rise against us because we shall stoop to raise them, he said, Charles Rowland. And after this came Macaulay's Minute. You know, the English Education Act of 1835 was passed in London, and this came after a 15-year debate between the Anglicists and the Orientalists. And then they said, no, we are going to use our funding only for English medium institutes, only when English is the medium of learning. We are not going to fund Sanskrit universities, colleges which teach Persian or Sanskrit. We are only going to fund universities or institutions which teach in English. Okay? So here's a famous Macaulay's Minute on Education, which was the bedrock of our Indian education policy. He said, we must at present do our best to form a class who may be interpreters between us and the millions whom we govern, a class of persons, Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. To that class we may be able to refine the vernacular dialects of the country, to enrich those dialects with terms of science borrowed from the Western nomenclature, and to render them by degrees fit vehicles for conveying knowledge to the great mass of the population. So this is the kind of education system which was imposed on India, and in a way it is still continuing even today, because not much has changed. Meanwhile, when India was embroiled in the education debate, it's interesting that England was languishing in illiteracy. So, a minuscule fraction went to school, and the only book most literate people had read in England was the Bible. The first elementary school came up in 1850. So, and I took this quote from Charles Dickens, Nicholas Nickleby, which gives you the state of the education system, which you can probably get some ideas. Schoolmasters as a race were blockheads and impostors, ignorant, sordid, brutal men to whom few considerate men would have entrusted boarding or lodging of a horse or dog. These schools were opened by any man who had not proved his fitness for any other occupation in life. This was totally different from what India had when the British came to India. It was only the best when you teach. Now this is a very important book, The Beautiful Tree, and this is written by Dharampal, who has been receiving recognition only recently. And while he's sort of getting a lot of accolades, he said he came across a series of surveys conducted by the British. So he went to England for some time, and he spent time in the libraries in London. And he came across a lot of archival material, and he was astounded to find surveys conducted by the British. So before the English Education Act was put into effect, the British actually conducted surveys all over India to know the level of education, right? And so they sent people, Madras presidency, so in the southern part of India, then Punjab, then Bengal, they sent people to do the surveys, and then they documented all of that. And so he came across those surveys, and it gives a lot of interesting information. What it shows is that schooling was absolutely thriving in India. There was a school in every village, okay? So every village in India had a pathshala, had a school. And there were 100,000 pathshalas in Bihar and Bengal alone, right? The place where you saw the maximum in the eastern side, all those those universities, that's where the maximum number of schools were, right? But then they were there in other parts also. Reading, writing, epics, arithmetic were all taught in all these schools. So it was literally like almost like 100% literacy, very high literacy. Dedicated teachers, superior methods of teaching, high attendance. And this was certified by the British officers themselves, who were posted in those areas, because they wrote all those letters and sent it to London. And they talk about how these, it's actually quite touching. Some of the British tax collectors have written that they're feeling very guilty collecting such high taxes from these poor people who are struggling so hard to maintain their education system. So they have written about how these Brahmins are still going to school to teach, even though they don't have enough to eat for themselves, they're still going to school every day to teach. This has been mentioned. In a large number of schools, Shudras were in majority, while the Brahmins and Vaisyas, or the Vaishyas, were in minority. Now this is going against a stereotype. Okay, so until Dharampal found this, not many people knew that actually there were Shudras in all the schools. So if you go and read Dharampal's book, he has given tables, he has given data, where how many students were studying in all those schools. Whatever data was supplied by the officers, right? Next slide. So this is, if you see this, you will see that Shudras are more than Brahmins in so many districts in Tamil Nadu, and then you'll find similar in other states of India as well. It's too small for you to read, but you'll get it in Dharampal's beautiful tree. Then Alexander Walker, who was in East India Company, who was an employee, he said, no people probably appreciate more justly the importance of instruction than the Hindus. And he said they sacrifice all the feelings of wealth, family, pride and caste that their children may have the advantage of good education. This love of learning was no exclusive characteristics of the Brahmins, but this desire is strongly impressed on the minds of all the Hindus. So we observe this. There are many people who have written all these things about Indians being obsessed with education and learning. Now, you must remember that India was ruled for the benefit of Britain. So all those years that Britain was ruling, everything that India produced, food grains, textiles, steel, gold, silver, minerals, was used by Britain. So it was like a workshop for Britain. All the factories were there to serve the British. So there was no food for teachers and students in Pathshalas because taxes were raised so high. In some places like Tanjore, mass poverty was created overnight by imposing 59% taxes. So you know the term collector, that is there even today in India. They were there just to collect taxes. They were not there to improve the lot of the people that they were governing. So their only job was to just extract as much of tax as possible and give it to the British government. It was not used for the benefit of India. Right? So district collectors' role was to please citizens. Temples were not spared. That is the time when temples had to part with their donations, whatever they got, and give it to the government, which is something that people are trying to fight today. They're trying to put a case against that, the government, because the minority institutions are not touched, right? The Muslim and the other religions, their temples are not taxed to the extent that the Hindu temples are taxed. And this is coming right from the British times. Poverty and famines became rampant under the British. This was a time when the great famines happened in India, when so much of food grain was diverted to England. Even though there was no drought, there was food. It was all being grown by them. But they had to give it all as taxes, and that's how, look at this illustration, the famine of India, where they are coming and trying to, they're collecting rations from the British officers. So this was all man-made, created by the British. The British educational policies sounded the death knell for regional languages. So the mother tongues were relegated to second languages. So the illiteracy that is talked about today is a product of British rule, because the languages that they were educated in, they were speaking, were all eliminated, right? They were reduced, I mean to the point that they were treated as second languages. So Gandhi, Mohandas Gandhi said in 1931, that the British had left India more illiterate than it was just 100 years before. Today, India still has one of the highest number of illiterate people, which is totally man-made. When India became independent, now we cannot totally blame the British because we had a chance. When we got independence, there was a time. That was a time when it could have changed. But maybe this is still early days. In 70 years, we had only one party ruling the country, and maybe that's why we were backward. And things are changing. But the problem is that India's self-gaze is still through alien eyes. So because our history has been written by the British, so most people who are studying in Indian educational systems, institutes, they look at themselves through the eyes of an alien, not from the insider's viewpoint. So I believe that our past heritage lies buried in regional and Sanskrit literature. It's important to know our regional languages so that we can know our real history, and we can try to raise up India to what it was in just about 200-300 years ago. I just want to give some points about the Indian learning ecosystem, what it gave to the world. Okay, the concept of universal education as a prerequisite to prosperity and happiness, that has come from India. It prepared a student not just for a career, but for life itself. It was not always just learning the subject, but also about how to live your life, right? It improved memory, the way of teaching. It focused on improving memory. It inculcated a spirit of inquiry, logical thinking, debating, and love of learning. Then moral values were woven into academics, right? Dharma, the dharma-based approach. So Shraddha, integrity, commitment, discipline, hygiene. This was all part of the education system. The concept of mentorship, conferencing also can be given to India, because that most of the Vedas and all those books that are very famous, which are referred to, have come out of conferences because a mass of scholars would gather, would give their views, and that would be documented. Self-awareness, spirituality, self-care of health, all this was embedded in education. So it's not like today when a student falls sick and doesn't know what to do, he goes to the doctor. But in India, they knew how to treat themselves. They would know what kind of drinks to make for themselves, what to pound and make a paste of and apply on their body or eat or drink. So these things were all taught. Students knew how to take care of their health, at least the minor ailments. And it was interdisciplinary and collaborative, the educational system. There were no silos. And care of nature and environment was core to every subject. There was no separate subject called environmental sciences or engineering. It was, if you are studying chemistry, you had to know that you have to care for the environment. In anything that you do or anything that you innovate, the nature or the environment was part of you. So that was taught to every student. It was not an external or separate subject. Right? Now, there are some people who ask me, why do we need to study history? Especially in India, I get this question. They say that, why do we focus on the great glory of the past? Let's just look at today's problems and let's go to the future. So I tell them, I use this quote by Michael Crichton, and he said, if you don't know history, then you don't know anything. You are a leaf that doesn't know it is part of a tree. Right? It's a continuum. Whatever happened yesterday is going to influence what's happening today. The policies in the past influences what's happening today, and it's going to influence what's going to happen tomorrow. It's a continuum. That's why it's so important. Whereas history is not studied all that much, it's not considered as important as mathematics and science in India. So that's why I take this quote to India when we represent India. So with this, I come to the end of my presentation. Thank you for coming. If you have any questions, please email me, and you can find my book on Amazon. And I'm part of Indian History, Awareness and Research, a think tank which is based in Houston, and we are all engaged in researching into historical narratives that haven't got as much attention in the past. So we're doing all that.